Hello and welcome. Thanks for tuning in. You're watching Gravitas. My name is Priyanka Sharma. Here's what's coming up on the show tonight. For weeks now, we've been talking about the cost of living crisis, how it impacts you and me. Across the world, people are angry, they are frustrated. Basic commodities like food and fuel have now become too expensive. Today, Europe saw this frustration play out on its streets. In Paris, thousands marched for better wages, better salaries. This is now a nationwide strike. Scuffles broke out on the streets. Is this a one-off protest, or will this spill over into a movement across Europe? What can authorities do? This is our top focus tonight on Gravitas. Stay with us. France, Italy, Belgium, Spain. 4 leading European economies. All 4 have witnessed mass protests in recent days. All 4 happened because of exactly the same reasons. Rising food prices, out of control energy bills, and lower wages. Basically, the ongoing cost of living crisis. It is now hitting Europe hard. Today, Europe witnessed one more protest. In France. Yes, the European power is quickly becoming a hotspot for these protests. Just look at these visuals. Over the weekend, we saw large crowds on the streets of Paris, and today, trade unions took to the streets. There was a massive crowd on the streets of Paris. And going by some reports, scuffles broke out between the cops and the protesters. So what do these protesters want? They are demanding higher salaries. These protests are being called Emmanuel Macron's stiffest challenge yet. But he isn't the only European leader who is facing this challenge. The entire economy of the euro area is now being tested. Why is the European economy hurting? That's our cover story tonight on Gravitas. Let me tell you what's happening in France. It was a day of major disruptions. Trade unions called for a nationwide transport strike. The reason, as I said earlier, is the demand for higher salaries. The unions were holding talks with the government. They remain in a deadlock. The move by the trade unions comes after workers at refineries staged a walkout. This disrupted the distribution of fuel across France. Remember these long lines. For nearly 3 weeks, drivers struggled to get fuel. As several fuel depots were closed down, even now French drivers are struggling.
It's been 2 weeks now that the French government says that it will be fixed in the week. What week? We don't know. It's starting to be too long now. We professionals, but also the individuals, we are fed up. Seriously, a solution needs to be found. I live pretty far in the suburbs, and in the suburbs there is no petrol at all. I came to central Paris now to find some. As I am a courier, I need petrol to be able to work. As simple as that.
French President Emmanuel Macron was forced to step in. He issued orders and forced some workers on strike to return to the world. The negotiations have clearly broken down because the French government is in no mood to relent. Recently, the French finance minister declared the time for talks is now over.
I consider the negotiations to have happened. I think the majority has spoken. In my opinion, what we need for the coming days is firmness, authority, a return to normal, and the respect of the voice of the majority. When a negotiation took place and the majority has spoken, the majority's decision should apply. It's called democracy.
Today's protest is a response from the unions. They are clearly doubling down. Workers staged a protest at prominent areas in Paris. They believe the French government is treating them unfairly. Listen in now to what some of the transport workers have to say about this.
Today, the wages at the RATP for someone who comes in, he comes in a bit above the minimum wage. It's 1,400 to 1,500 francs. So it's largely insufficient, given that the company has changed the working conditions since August. We work 1 hour more. I have 15 years seniority at the RATP and I barely get 2,000 euros.
Today there are several reasons, but the main one is the revaluation of salaries. The index point has been frozen for more than 10 years. It was revalued this year by 2.2%. But in the view of the inflation over this year and over the last 10 years, it is not enough for employees.
Now that's the kind of story you'll hear all around Europe these days, because the region is growing through an economic turmoil. Rising inflation is hurting people's pockets. The cost of living has gone up and the euro area is finally feeling the shock of Russia's war in Ukraine.
The energy crisis, especially in Europe, is not a transitory shock. The geopolitical realignment of energy supplies in the wake of the war is both broad and permanent. Winter 2022 will be challenging, but winter 2023 will likely be worse.
Those words are significant. It isn't a transitory shock. That was the assessment from the International Monetary Fund. Winter is almost here and protests across the region are intensifying. It seems like people across Europe are already hurting. We showed you these pictures yesterday. Again, they are from France. Thousands of protesters hit the streets on Sunday against rising prices. On the same day, there were protests in Rome. Again, people were demanding relief from rising gas and electricity prices. Similarly, there have been protests in Brussels, London, Madrid, and Budapest. All this in recent weeks. The war in Ukraine has tested Europe's solidarity. So far, they have presented a largely united response against Russian aggression. But the crisis within European economies presents a challenge to their unity. And now to get more perspective, joining me now from Madrid in Spain is Jamie Martinez. He's an economic advisor. Jamie, thanks for joining us. Now, my first question, we're seeing protests across France over the cost of living crisis. In fact, Europe is on the boil. We saw some visuals, in fact. Do you see this crisis getting worse?
Yeah, this growth, as I said before, the growth in the level of prices is giving more pressure to the labor and trade unions in France, which now they are asking for higher salaries and announcing national strikes in the country. Of course, this gives more pressure, and there is a big political risk for the government of Macron, which is now working the national budget for the next year, for 2023. And for sure, we can expect that the situation is going to get worse because the labor unions in France are very strong, and they are going to demand higher salaries, a great increase. But I think that despite these risks, wage increases should be moderate to avoid an inflationary spiral where the new wages fuel additional price increases.
Right, Jamie, the entire economy of the euro area is being tested. My question to you is, did experts and analysts anticipate this?
I think the European Union, in terms of economy, is now facing a huge risk of recession. As for instance, the United States, it went into a recession in the last semester, but now the European Union is having a lower economic growth in terms of consumption, investment, and of course also in terms of exports, because this problem of the inflation is affecting worldwide. But that's why I think to tackle the problem of this high inflation in Europe, it is necessary to reduce the public spending of the government. For instance, talking about France, the public spending in terms of GDP is 59%, which is very high in comparison with other countries of the OECD.
Right, you raised some valid points about what needs to be done, but my question now is what happens from this point on? The French president, Emmanuel Macron, was in fact forced to step in, but talks seem to have broken down. Is this the beginning of a wider movement, perhaps similar to the Yellow Vest protests?
Well, I wouldn't dare to bet if it's going to be that worse in terms of if this movement is going to export in the whole continent of Europe. But yes, of course, we can expect more pressure for all the trade unions in Europe claiming higher salaries. And I think governments in Europe, they will have to respond with more moderation. Because, of course, we can understand that workers are claiming more salaries, but as I said before, we can avoid, if we want to avoid inflation spiral, all right, we have to be very moderate with this increase of salaries. And also doing so and maybe reducing the government spending, the public spending, the fiscal policy of Euro will be in coordination with the monetary policy addressed by the European Central Bank.
Right now, Jamie, thanks so much for all those inputs and thanks for joining us on Gravitas. We'll, of course, continue to get you all the updates of what's happening in Europe, all because of the cost of living crisis. And now let's shift our focus to the Ukraine war. Reuters is now reporting that Iran will be sending missiles and drones to Russia. This comes on the heels of the developments that we were talking about yesterday, where kamikaze drones struck Ukrainian capital, Kiev, and another city, killing 8 people. Remember, Ukraine had said that kamikaze drones that Russia had used were made in Iran, a claim that Iran had categorically denied. Now, Reuters is reporting, and I quote, "A deal was agreed on October 6th when Iran's first vice president, Mohammad Mokhber, 2 senior officials from Iran's powerful Revolutionary Guards, and an official from the Supreme National Security Council visited Moscow for talks with Russia about the delivery of the weapons." I quote again, "The Russians had asked for more drones and those Iranian ballistic missiles with improved accuracy, particularly the Fateh and the Zulfagar missiles family." I'd like to stress at this point that WION has not been able to verify this claim, but we can tell you that it was only today that the Kremlin denied using Iranian drones. Listen in.
Only Russian equipment is being used. You know this, with Russian names.
So how is Ukraine reacting to this? Kiev says it is moving to cut diplomatic ties with Iran. What's more, it is also sending an official note to Israel seeking immediate air defense supplies. Take a look.
Tehran bears full responsibility for the destruction of relations with Ukraine. I am submitting to the President of Ukraine a proposal to break diplomatic ties with Iran.
Israel has not responded to these remarks, but what's happening is extremely significant. And I will tell you why. Because this could be read as West Asia being dragged into Europe's war. So far, Israel has only condemned the Russian invasion of Ukraine. It did provide Ukraine with humanitarian relief, but that's about it. Israel or any other West Asian country has not sent weapons. And Ukraine says it's high time that Israel did.
Іран, ви знаєте, що Іран – це
You know that Iran is a red line for Israel. After Iran directly became involved in the aggression against Ukraine, I think that anyone in Israel who had any doubts as to helping Ukraine or not has now had their doubts dispelled.
Now, all of this comes on a day which began with Russia striking Ukraine's energy facilities. Once again, drones were used. Kiev was among the many cities that came under attack, and this time, the target was Kiev's northern area. It houses a thermal power station. Explosions were heard there at 9 a.m. local time. And this is what followed. Thick plumes of smoke could be seen rising over Kiev's skyline. The neighborhood of Troishina was left without any power and water. There were also attacks on Dnipro, Zaporizhia, Kharkiv, and Zhytomyr. The city's mayor says there is no light or water in Zhytomyr in particular. Just think about that, no light or water. Hospitals are being forced to run on power backup. And this is the Dnipro power station. It is among the many facilities which were attacked today. How were these attacks carried out? By missiles and drones. The US says that the repeated attacks on Ukraine demonstrate Putin's brutality. In Ukraine, President Volodymyr Zelensky says that 30% of the country's power stations have been destroyed since the 10th of October. As we speak, multiple Ukrainian towns are facing rolling blackouts. People across the country have been told to reduce their energy consumption. Many Ukrainians are buying power generators, gas burners. You see, this is not the first time that energy has come into focus in this war. We have been telling you about this for months now. The war in Ukraine has become an energy war. Look at everything that's happening in Europe, or what's happened with the Nord Stream. The West accuses Russia of leveraging energy. Russia, on the other hand, is pointing at a witch hunt. And here's something else that happened today. Denmark released its findings of the preliminary investigation of damage to the Nord Stream pipelines. The country said that the leaks were caused by a powerful explosion. And now listen in to what the Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov had to say about the investigation.
This international investigation was set up inherently to put the blame on Russia. It's absurd. This is absurd.
What happened in Ukraine, though, is a little different. It has little to do with weaponizing energy. It is more about urban warfare. I don't know if you've noticed, but for more than a week now, we have seen a change in Russia's approach. What I mean is that civilian infrastructure has come under heavy attack. Apartment buildings have been targeted. So have college areas, playgrounds. So is it a trick to try and build pressure on civilians? We told you about the various cities that Russia attacked today. Let me give you some numbers. Zhytomyr is a city of some 263,000 people. Dnipro is a city of 1 million people. Kharkiv of 1.43 million people. Can so many people afford to scramble for energy in pre-winter months? Now isn't the time when Ukraine can afford heating outages. And that's exactly what the West is pointing at. It says that Russia is trying to demoralize Ukrainians. Should it be surprised, though? Enemy countries have used this tactic since time immemorial. It's called psychological warfare. Try to break down the enthusiasm of the civilians, sow seeds of doubt vis-a-vis the country's leadership, his or her ability to win a war. Is this what Russia is trying to do? Is this the game which its General Armageddon, as he's known as, Sergei Surovikin, is playing? Take, for instance, what happened this morning. While energy facilities appear to be the primary targets, there were also attacks on residential infrastructure. In Mykolaiv, an apartment building was hit. At least one man died.
It's impossible to describe it. So much dust. We were in the basement. We crawled out through openings in the ground. Our neighbor died, unfortunately.
Well, the Russians probably get pleasure from this. They get pleasure from us feeling bad. They feel pleased. I think they want us to bomb and shell their city buildings and so on. But we won't, so that we show we are different from them.
So those were the voices from Ukraine as the war enters day 237. Will the coming days see more countries being dragged into the war? One that for the longest time has been seen as one of the West's making, and one for that the West alone must fight. Right, let's move on now and shift our attention to China. It could be planning an invasion of its own, and that's the claim of the United States. Yes, I'm talking about Taiwan. The threat of a Chinese invasion of Taiwan has always been there. But Washington has reason to believe that Beijing is now working on a much faster timeline. Those are not my words. That's what Antony Blinken has to say. The US Secretary of State has shared his assessment. He believes there has been a change in Beijing's approach from Taiwan. Listen in now to what he said. I'm quoting. If peaceful means didn't work, then it would employ coercive means, and possibly, if coercive means don't work, maybe forceful means to achieve its objectives. And that is what is profoundly disrupting the status quo and creating tremendous tensions. So what's driving this assessment from Blinken? Was it the recent speech from Xi Jinping? It is possible, because the Chinese president refused to renounce the use of force to take Taiwan. Listen in.
The resolution of the Taiwan issue is a matter for the Chinese ourselves to decide. We insist on striving for the prospect of peaceful reunification with the greatest sincerity and with the greatest effort. However, we are not committed to abandoning the use of force, and we reserve the option of taking all necessary measures. This is aimed at the interference of external forces and a very small number of Taiwan independent separatists and their secessionist activities, and not at the compatriots in Taiwan at large.
We reserve the option to take all necessary measures. It is as clear as it can get. Taipei has shot back a stern response. The statement comes from the presidential office. It said, Taiwan won't back down on national sovereignty, and it will not compromise on democracy and freedom. The statement also said that war is not an option, but some Taiwanese officials believe that a conflict is inevitable. This is not a matter of if they will invade, it's a matter of when they will invade. That's what Admiral Lee Sai-min said recently. He used to head the armed forces of Taiwan. America too has reasons to believe that China is working to a timeline. Last year, the then commander of the US Indo-Pacific Command had delivered a testimony. Admiral Philip Davidson has spoken to lawmakers. We have a copy of his testimony now. He was specifically asked about China's likely timelines, and here is the answer that he gave. I'm quoting again. I think the threat is manifest during this decade, in fact, in the next 6 years. Can a potential military conflict happen sooner than that? It is possible, because Xi Jinping wants his military to move faster. That's right. The Chinese president has delivered his work report to the Communist Party. What is that? It's a comprehensive view of the achievements of the government. More importantly, it sets the policy for the coming year. In this year's work report, Xi Jinping has given some specific instructions to his troops. Let me now read them out for you. These are Xi Jinping's words. The use of military power needs to be normalized and used in diverse ways. We need to be able to stage military operations readily, deter and control risks and conflicts, and win regional wars. The mandate is clear. Xi Jinping now wants a PLA that can win wars for him. And the Chinese military must move faster to reach that level. It is a clear signal of intent. China has intensified pressure on Taiwan this year. Nancy Pelosi's visit to the island triggered unprecedented drills by the Chinese side. Since then, lawmakers from the United States and other Western nations have paid visits to Taiwan. China has responded with more military coercion. It is becoming a predictable pattern now, and this will continue. Considering the dangerous signals that are coming out of Beijing now. And to discuss China's Taiwan rhetoric further, joining me now on Gravitas is Greg Swenson, an international affairs expert. He joins us from London. Greg, my first question, what do you make of Secretary Blinken's comments saying China's plans to annex Taiwan are moving much faster?
It's a great question. I think Secretary of State Blinken was wise to indicate the concern, at least for the, on behalf of the United States, that Xi wants to ramp this up. But there is no definite, or there was really no definitive statement. So it might be that Secretary of State Blinken just wants to make the issue, elevate the issue to the public. But there was no real, I don't think there was really a cause for concern on any specific comments from Xi. I think it might be accelerated, but it could also be a longer term plan, looking out to the centennial anniversary of China in I guess it would be 2049.
Right, it's interesting you say that because Xi Jinping told the Communist Party Congress that Taiwan is at the core to plans for China's so-called rejuvenation. How do you view this?
Yes, I mean, look, it should be concerning to the United States and specifically to Secretary of State Blinken. So I think he's wise to make note of it, but I don't think that it's wise to elevate the issue too much. There's really been no definitive statements. But I think it's nice to see Secretary of State Blinken actually make those comments, especially given the meeting that he had with Jake Sullivan at the beginning of the Biden administration in Alaska with officials from the CCP, where they were really basically schooled in this meeting and really demonstrated weakness in front of these officials. So I think it was good that he's trying to come out with a little bit more emphasis and alarm about the Taiwan situation. It's definitely something that's not going away, and I think it's wise to elevate the issue.
Right, Greg, just a final question there. Experts say that Xi's Taiwan rhetoric has raised the specter of war. What do you think?
Yes, of course. Nobody wants that, and I think that it would be unwise of the CCP to enter into any sort of armed conflict. Obviously they would like to do this without, annex Taiwan without any armed conflict. But just the fact that they're discussing it should be a concern. I hope that it elevates the issue in the United States enough to basically encourage the Congress to allocate more funds for defense spending. There's a real concern in the U.S. With defense spending, the Pentagon budget at 3% of GDP, when in the 80s it was 5 to 6% of GDP. So there's a lot of push, even from the Democrats, to get that defense budget up to the historical levels of 5 or 6% of GDP. There's really concerns. There are great concerns about the Navy right now, which is only delivered. They're delivering ships at a much slower pace than expected. Granted, they've gone from 291 to 296 ships since 2005, but that's not enough. China has gone from 216 to 360. You've got, the fighter planes and bombers at only 40% of the capacity of the 1980s. And the Army is down $59 billion in buying power just since 2018. So these are real issues in the United States. So if the concern about Taiwan elevates these concerns and encourages the Congress and hopefully the president to spend more money on defense, I think that's a good outcome.
Right, Greg, thanks so much for all those inputs and thanks for joining us. Now, perhaps for its Taiwan mission, China could be trying to recruit some trainers from the United Kingdom. A story today has shaken up British intelligence. China has recruited up to 30 retired British military pilots. What for? For the training of Chinese pilots in the PLA. How did this happen? How can former pilots from the British Air Force extend services to the Chinese military? Well, reports say that China is using an external agency to recruit these pilots, a private flying academy in South Africa, working as trainers for the Chinese. Now, this is a lucrative opportunity for these pilots. According to one claim, they are being offered about $270,000 a year. How would they train these Chinese pilots? Earlier today, we asked an expert. Listen in.
There will be a language barrier there, a huge language barrier. So I would make the assumption that they're having to go through interpreters, which will limit the complexity of the language that is used by UK instructors. But then also you have to factor in the fact that the Chinese are going to be using very, very different equipments to the UK. And what I mean by that is the air defense radar will be different. The radar guided missiles will be different. The IR missiles, which are shorter range missiles, will be different. And the capabilities of all of those equipments and capabilities that I've just spoken about will be a very different beast to what the UK are using.
Now, the revelation has prompted action from London. The British Defence Ministry has spoken out, and this is what they said, and I'm quoting. "We are taking decisive steps to stop Chinese recruitment schemes attempting to headhunt serving former UK Armed Forces pilots to train People's Liberation Army personnel in the People's Republic of China." Well, it is good to have intent, but the British government doesn't have any specific laws or legal tools to stop these recruitments for now. There is a new national security bill that is being considered by lawmakers. Apparently, this will help the British government in dealing with this problem. Today's revelations might create a sense of urgency within lawmakers to make a fresh push for new legal safeguards. And now let's talk about COVID. Yes, that's right. The virus is still making news. Another strain has been detected in India, that too, right when the festive season has begun. What is this new strain? What does this mean for holiday plans? In the next few minutes, we'll give you all the details. Let me start by saying that no new COVID variant has been reported since the Omicron variant emerged back in January. That remains the case. Instead, most of the new strains are subvariants of Omicron. Reports say that in India, the most prevalent type is the BA.275. In the US, it's the BA.5. In the UK, the BA.5-2 is leading the pack. And in Singapore, it's the XBB. But what does this mean? Why is this important? Well, because we're seeing something like a subvariant soup all across the world. And in this mixture, new strains are fighting to become more dominant. And one of them happens to be the BQ1. It's steadily gaining ground in the United States, and now it has made its way to India. This Omicron subvariant has evolved from the BA.5, and scientists say that this new subvariant, could be more contagious than its parent type. There's more. It could also be immune evasive, which means that vaccines or past infections may not protect people from BQ1. In general, COVID restrictions are easing across the world. The world seems to be losing its appetite for lockdowns. China, of course, remains a major exception. Taiwan became one of the latest countries to get rid of mandatory quarantines. People are traveling across the world after years of restrictions. They are likely to spread newer COVID strains to different countries. So what can be done? Well, new vaccines are being developed to target specific variants. Scientists predict that COVID boosters may become an annual affair. It is already becoming the case in America.
If you think about it, take an average 40-year-old, if they got a booster last fall, they first became eligible for a new vaccine just a month ago. So essentially, for a majority of Americans, we've already gotten into a once-a-year rhythm.
And now let's talk about what should we not do. According to America's top infectious diseases expert, Dr. Anthony Fauci, we should not become complacent. In a recent interview, Fauci spoke of the dangers of declaring victory. This is after US President Joe Biden already said that the pandemic was over. Fauci believes that funding to combat COVID-19 should not stop and that long COVID needs to be given more thought and focus. On the funding front, health officials in the United States are complaining. Listen in.
No doubt about it that our response has been hampered by that lack of funding. But all of this is made just dramatically harder by congressional inaction. You can't fight a deadly virus without resources, and congressional inaction is really costly.
So as the world tires of COVID, hopes are that it will become relatively mild, like influenza, and then people could just move on. Omicron did have a lower death toll than Delta, but is it wise to lower our guard down, especially now? The XBB strain doing the rounds in Singapore is a combination of two different Omicron subvariants. The emerging new strains could become more deadly. But are harsh lockdowns the way forward? How long can people hold up economically? India's festive season has begun. People are celebrating and shopping. After 2 years of restricted celebrations, they are heading out in huge numbers. And soon, this will be the case around the world. You'll see similar pictures coming in. People breathing a sigh of relief, truly wanting to believe the pandemic is over and diving into the holiday spirit. The way forward then remains regular vaccination. The virus will continue to evolve. It may be tedious to get booster shots every year, but if that's the price to pay for being able to celebrate with your loved ones, it's definitely worth a shot. Our next story is about cancer. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that we all know someone who has been affected by cancer in some way. In fact, they say everyone, everywhere, has been affected by cancer in some shape or form. But what I'm about to tell you is still alarming. New research finds that cancer cases are rising globally, especially among the young. Cancer is no longer a disease affecting the elderly alone. Cases of cancer are being identified in adults under 50 years of age, and this is now being called a global epidemic. But why is this alarming trend emerging? Our next report has some answers.
Cancer, that dreaded term. An illness which is life-altering in many ways. Not just for the person battling cancer, but also those around her. Even as the world tries to recover from the coronavirus pandemic, cancer has been claiming lives and is one of the leading causes of death worldwide, accounting for nearly 10 million deaths in 2020. That's nearly 1 in 6 deaths. According to the World Health Organization, some of the most common forms of cancer include breast cancer, lung cancer, colon and rectum cancer, prostate cancer, and skin cancer. This was in 2020. It is unclear how the numbers stand as of now. Remember, for the last 2 years, the pandemic has kept health professionals occupied. And as for cancer patients, their treatment has been delayed. Some were diagnosed too late or not at all. But this isn't what's alarming health professionals at the moment. A new trend has come to light. Previous data had found cancer to be more prevalent among older adults, mostly people above the age of 50, but that's not the case anymore. A new review of cancer registry records from 44 countries finds that the incidence of cancer has increased across the world, specifically among the younger lot. that is, people under the age of 50. This has been observed across multiple middle and high-income countries. When cancer strikes someone under the age of 50, it is termed as early onset cancer. The report states that younger people are being diagnosed with cancers in the breast, endometrium, esophagus, kidney, liver, and more. And this trend has been rising steadily across the world since the 1990s. So what could have led to this? Why are younger people falling prey to cancer? There could be two reasons for this, suggests research. One, there is more sensitive testing to some cancer types, for instance, thyroid cancer. Two, our lifestyle. There's plenty of research to show you the links between cancer and other health ailments, be it obesity, inactivity, diabetes, or poor lifestyle choices like smoking, alcohol consumption. Too much red meat and added sugar could be another contributor, says the study. Even rising pollution has played a role in increasing the risk of cancer. And let's not forget, they call us the burnout generation, as we join the hustle culture. We compromise on sleep, we work long hours, and these choices are contributing to a higher incidence of cancer among the young. So what can we do? For starters, we need to talk about early onset cancer. And at an individual level, we need to make better lifestyle choices. Stop smoking. Stop leading a sedentary lifestyle. Stop getting a majority of your daily calorie intake from processed foods. Stop prioritizing work and inhumane hours over mental well-being. These may seem like cosmetic changes in the short term, but could save a life in the long run.
Now, before we wrap up, let me ask you a question. What, according to you, is the worst day of the week? Take a wild guess. Yes, it is Monday, the dreaded Monday. It's that day of the week that no one likes, unless you are one of those who have weekly offs on Mondays. Well, most of us don't. For most of us, Monday is the day we return to work after our weekly offs, our weekends. Now, such is the global consensus on the hatred for Monday that the Guinness World Record has officially named Monday as the worst day of the week. It's hard to say whether this is a joke or not, and it is equally hard to not talk about all the reactions to this announcement. Let's start by taking a look at this tweet that the Guinness World Record put out. This one reads, "We're officially giving Monday the record of the worst day of the week." Well, if you ask me, there was no need for this. But now that Monday has been officially declared the worst of the days, in the spirit of a good joke or otherwise, people just can't seem to keep calm. Someone asked, why did it take the Guinness Book so long to make this announcement? After all, Monday has been hated since time immemorial, and we are reminded of this dislike for Monday long before Monday even arrives. Monday blues. You could be lunching with your friends on a fine Sunday afternoon when you are suddenly reminded of the awful day that awaits you. A few more hours and the clock will strike 12, the calendar will change date, and it will be Monday again. The same old Monday where you have to drag yourself to work, drink one too many cups of coffee to try and win over the Monday blues, and then struggle to concentrate. Maybe even give up and start praying that the day comes to an end. If you resonate with these feelings, let me reassure you that you are not alone. Mondays are universally disliked. Not too long ago, the University of Vermont did this very interesting analysis. It looked at tweets to read people's moods. Researchers found that people are miserable on Mondays. What happens the day after Monday? Well, people's mood tends to improve. It peaks on Saturday, no surprises there, and then drops again, meaning you are not the only one thinking about the awful Monday while lunching on Sunday. Now, how many of you are Garfield fans? He is the world's most popular comic cat. Garfield does not go to school. He doesn't have Monday tests to take. Neither does he have a job to go to. Every day is pretty much the same for the cat. But Garfield also hates Mondays. The cat also gets mad when people get the fact, he gets mad when people like the fact that he hates Mondays, like Odie and John. One is a beagle, the other is a human friend. Fans would know this. One day, John informed Garfield that their Wi-Fi wasn't working, the coffee machine is broken, and the store is out of donuts. Also, there is a hailstorm outside. Guess what Garfield said? It's even Mondayer than usual. So Garfield, or Guinness record, when it comes to Mondays, we all agree that it is probably the worst day of the week. Fun fact. People also bunk work the most on Mondays. One Twitter user proudly admitted to being a part of this bunking club. Another replied to the Guinness World Records tweet saying that maybe it was a social media manager cribbing about Monday, just that he or she forgot to switch accounts. High chances. Because the Monday effect is a legit thing. Researchers have concrete evidence that Monday blues take a toll on your work, on your concentration, performance. One university found that Monday blues can even hurt supply chain performance. Well, what can we do? Mondays are going to come, whether you like it or not. Mondays are Mondays, but the good news is it is still 5 days away, so you can relax for now. And on that note, it's time now to take a look at what's happening around the world in Gravitas Global Headlines.
Ratings agency Fitch warns that the Fed rate hike and inflation could drive the United States economy into a 1990s-style recession in the spring. Prime Minister Liz Truss apologizes for threatening the UK's economic stability after she was forced to scrap her vast tax-cutting plans and adopt public spending cuts instead. An Iranian athlete issues an apology after appearing without a hijab while representing her country in an international rock climbing tournament. Meanwhile, Britain's foreign ministry summons the Chinese chargé d'affaires in London after a Hong Kong pro-democracy protester was assaulted at its consulate in Manchester. Australia says it will no longer recognize West Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, reversing a decision taken by the government of former Prime Minister Scott Morrison in 2018. Israel slams the decision. A helicopter carrying Kedarnath pilgrims in Uttarakhand in India crashes, killing at least 7 people, including 6 pilgrims and the pilot. The British competition regulator has ordered Facebook's owner Meta to sell the animated graphics startup Giphy in a final decision after a failed appeal by the US tech giant. The United Nations Children's Fund says Somalia is facing a famine last seen half a century ago, as the UN body sets a new target of more than $2 billion in funding needs. Real Madrid and France striker Karim Benzema clinched his maiden Ballon d'Or award. The 34-year-old led Real to the Champions League La Liga double last season. Spain and Barcelona star Alexia Putellas won the women's honor for the 2nd year in a row. Pat Cummins has been named as Australia's new one-day international captain. The fast bowler is already Australia's test skipper and replaces Aaron Finch, who announced his retirement from the 50-over format last month.
And that's a wrap on Gravitas. Thanks for watching with me, Priyanka Sharma. We leave you as always with Gravitas Images.